Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. This is episode 29. My guest on the show will need no introduction if you are between the ages of 35 down to, let's say, 27. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's go. Here we go. Alrighty, welcome back to the podcast, folks. Today I have got Joshua Harris on the line. Many of you will recognize that name from your deepest, darkest memories of being a young teenager in the 90s or early 2000s and trying to figure out how to get married and being given probably one or both of his books at the time, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, as well as Boy Meets Girl. Joshua Harris, thank you for being on the show.
Hey, great to be with you. Thank you.
So I read your books. I was, in 1999, which I think was maybe like the peak of that kind of thing, I was 13. So that was like, okay. I was right in the heart of that. I got married. We kind of moved on. And then it was only in the last couple of years that I, through social media and blogs, looked back and discovered, oh man, like I guess there were some issues with those books, sure, but I did not realize like the level of hatred. I'm like, I considered introducing you as like the most hated man among evangelical millennials. I thought maybe that's not a really lovely way to start a conversation. So here's a humorous story instead. So, so for anybody not in the loop, you have recently released a statement, a kind of a here we are all these years later, and you're actually having both those books withdrawn from print, and now there's a documentary out about your journey. So give us maybe a bit of a nutshell on what this is, where we're at today, and how we've kind of come here.
Well, I mean, it's hard to put it in a nutshell. It's a long journey for me, writing the book 20 years ago, and only in the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, beginning to grapple with criticisms of the book that had a lot more weight because they were coming from people who had tried to apply the ideas and married and were now facing regrets, or not married and now facing regrets, and talking about the impact of the ideas in my book. So, it sort of sounds, when you give the summary of, the books have been pulled and we made a documentary, it sounds all sort of neat and tidy and put together, but it's really been a somewhat chaotic, not very controlled process of personal grappling, and then trying to figure out a way to engage in a public way the people who had read my book. And so the documentary was something that I did as part of my graduate studies, but it became a means by which I could talk face to face with people who had read my book, and authors and others who were writing and thinking about what had shaped my ideas at the time, as well as what the fallout has been from, the ideas in my book in the last 20 years. And the hope being that it would spark conversation and also be a means by which I could express my own, regret and apology for ways that my book hurt people. So the documentary is free. It's been released by Exploration Films. People can go and watch it for free. It's on Amazon Prime in the States and things like that. So we hope it will be something that will somehow encourage other people.
Yeah, I watched it this morning and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fascinating to see your approach to the feedback and to the pushback. It was fascinating to see the clothes we were all wearing in the 90s.
Oh my gosh.
It was really interesting seeing you on Huntley Street, some of those old clips.
Oh, right. Yeah.
With Reynold and Kathy Maines. I've connected with them recently. They're in Uganda doing totally different things.
Interesting.
Yeah, the passage of time is always fascinating. So So my wife and I, we both read those books back in the day. We were in youth group in a large non-denominational church. I think for us, I think we were shielded from a lot of the wider negative things that have really affected a lot of people. I mean, I think for us, your message basically boiled down to don't date without intentionality and don't have sex before marriage. So for us, that was like, okay, like, no, I mean, I think we're both type A, outgoing eldest children, my wife and I. So it wasn't a huge problem for us to create relationships and to connect with the opposite sex. Now, I do say that in hindsight. At the time, I felt terrible as a young man. I felt terribly unable to talk to women, but I think that was more just my perception, because other people would be like, are you kidding me? Like, you have so many great relationships with girls. So I realized partly that's just my own lens on myself. But I think also we both came from a culture, especially I came from a culture that said, well, take the good and leave the bad. So we didn't have a problem kind of sifting out. Well, some of this sounds a bit heavy-handed, but at the same time, like,
sure, you didn't take everything that I said as gospel.
Yeah, I don't think we did, and I think generally the particular church culture that we were in was very non-legalistic, very grace-based, and quite Christocentric, and so we also generally weren't all dating promiscuously. We weren't all having sex, and we had a measure and understanding of grace. So for some of us, it was like, okay, cool. This is like a decent, maybe minor course correction or just a decent way of summing up a handful of useful things. And we moved on. Now, by moved on, I got married at 19. Like I in some ways, I was like the poster child of some of the good outcomes of this, right? Like my wife and I were both virgins, I would say, on a technicality, but she didn't date anyone. She definitely was like, I am pursuing my relationship with God, and I am trusting that God will bring someone at the right time. And meanwhile, I've fallen in love with her. We're good friends already. And I'm terrified about confessing my love for her because it's the best female friendship I've ever had. And I feel like I'm going to throw it all away. And so we get down to this moment at 3 a.m. when we're camping with a bunch of friends. And I finally said, hey, listen, I really like you. And okay, I like you too. Cool. It wasn't until like 2 months later that she pulled up her journal and realized she remembered that she'd set aside a year to date God. And she had envisioned, which I understand, even as I say that, a huge bunch of people out there, like their skin is crawling and it's like, ugh, that's so like indicative of this awful culture. But she dates God for a year, and she had envisioned that God would bring some guy to her, at the end of that, and it would be so beautiful. And I confessed my love for her 3 hours into the first day of the new year. So from a spiritual, prophetic perspective, it lined up exactly to my wife's journey with the Lord. Now,
interesting.
Now, all that being said, every day from that moment onward was not the deal my wife thought she was getting. The man I was, the husband I turned out to be, the mental health issues that, like, definitely she was like, I have been sold a bill of goods that I did not think I was getting.
Right.
But at the same time, let me at least go on the record before we get into the dark and horrible things as saying that I received positive fruit from what I think you were trying to say. So let me put that out there, maybe with the caveats that we lived in a really healthy culture. Right.
Well, it is interesting. That's one of the things that I have learned in all of the conversations and all the stories that I've heard is that it's really important to honor other people's story and not assume that your own is this universal experience, whether, negative or positive, whether that relates to faith, whether that relates to your experience of relationships, whether that relates to purity culture or my books. Not everybody has had the same experience. And I think it's just really important that we listen to each other, that we honor each other's experience, and not tear other people down because their experience is different.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder, could you put into words for us some of the really hurtful experiences that people have had as a result?
Well, I think there are different categories. I think there would be people who would say that my book encouraged them to have this really fear-based perspective of their sexuality, so that they experience a lot of shame for being attracted to people, or it gave them a sense of just hesitancy and fear in relating to the opposite sex, so that they didn't pursue relationships when they wish they had, or they waited until they were ready for a serious relationship, but that made the relationship too serious too soon. There was too much pressure on the relationship, and that either harmed the relationship or it led to a marriage that they now regret. So there are a lot of layers to it. I think that for me, I identified this desire to be safe and to control outcomes by running away from what the perceived problem. And I don't think that's a healthy approach to any part of life now in retrospect. I have encountered people. I think originally I thought, well, my book wasn't perfect, but really the problem was when people forced it on other people. And there were many examples of that, pastors and parents and others kind of saying, this is how you should do things to other people. But as I have interacted with a lot of people, I've also come to see that there are people who were hurt, who took it on themselves and were trying to live up to a standard laid out in the book. And I think ended up kind of adopting a perspective that said, if you give your heart away in a relationship, if you get too close to someone, then you've lost part of yourself. You're less in some way because of that. And I don't think that that's a healthy perspective either.
Yeah, of course. We felt like, because of this cultural value, it was like, oh, well, no one's having sex because we're not supposed to be having sex. And since getting married, we've discovered that we're in the small minority, I guess. Well, I would say we are in a minority of our large circle of relationships as we've traveled the world and got to know people, especially to both have been virgins. And at the end of the day, I think we end up saying, okay, well, so what? I'm glad that we hadn't had sexual partners, for sure. I'm glad that's good. That's good. But at the same time, I spent 6 years before marriage and probably 6 years after marriage addicted to hardcore porn. So at least I'm a virgin though. Like, right? Like,
sure.
Okay, well, I've brought all kinds of baggage into my marriage that my wife didn't realize she was going to have to choose how she was going to respond to. We've had friends who are, one was sexually promiscuous because they hadn't come to faith, or one had been abused, or one had been sex trafficked. And, then they've got to enter into a relationship, and ultimately they haven't been given a great set of tools to make that relationship work.
Right.
And I think that's been probably my most poignant takeaway from the whole movement, the whole culture, is looking now at the relationships after the fact and saying, good Lord, we spent so much time and energy focusing on dating right that none of us had any clue how to be married right, and how to go about the business of loving someone who's flawed, because we had been holding out for someone who was flawless.
I think that's well said. I think that's true.
There's like this weird dichotomy where, and I discovered I was so guilty of this. It's like, as young men, especially our youth pastors, I don't know how widely this term was used, but it was very common in my culture, was the righteous fox. And we were all holding out for this righteous fox. And this pure, spotless, beautiful woman virgin was going to marry us and also somehow be an amazing sex goddess. And I realize now, I'm like, huh. And at the same time, we're telling all these women, wait for Mr. Right, wait for Mr. Right. But we haven't actually been equipping young men on how to love others selflessly, how to maturely lay down your own life like Christ loves the church. And so all these couples have just been thrown into marriage saying, well, okay, we followed all the rules, and here we are, and we are lost, totally lost. We've got friends who were dating since they were 14, courting since they were 14, which I remember you make fun of it. In I think in Boy Meets Girl, you're like, hold on, no, if you're 14, this doesn't apply to you. Like, stop. But either way, this couple's dating for years since they're teenagers, and they're married 6 months and they're divorced.
Yeah.
And they had nothing. They had no stable relational foundation. Do you think we're doing any better as a church, as communities, in equipping people for marriage? Like, what does your marriage journey look like?
Yeah, I really have no idea how the church at large is doing in this. I mean, I hope that these conversations that are taking place, where some of the unhealthy ideas in my own writing and in that culture are being addressed, that there's something more healthy taking its place. And that's part of the reason that we did the documentary, is because we wanted to encourage conversation about this and reflection about this, and hopefully even some healing that would be taking place. But I am trying to stay far away from pontificating about how things should be done. And, I'm hopeful that there are lots of other people who will have more insight and be able to help, share helpful content. And we tried to spotlight those people in the documentary, a great writer named Deborah Fileta, and others who are writing books about what healthy dating looks like, and what it looks like to prepare for marriage. And I feel like she's an example of someone that's facilitating a lot of really good conversations among singles and engaged couples.
Yeah. I really appreciated that. I enjoyed how there was a broad range of people interviewed from a fairly broad spectrum of Christianity, folks who would come from a Catholic tradition, folks from a more missional evangelical, some more progressive. It was great. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
Do you feel like what do we do with this culture, this kind of broader evangelical culture that was so focused on finding the right formula and giving it to our young people? Because I think in a certain sense, yes, you've got to own up for words you said, but at the same time, I think you've been a scapegoat for this culture that told everyone what to do and how to behave and what was right, like this totally black and white, dualistic, fundamentalist Christian thing. What do we do with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there aren't many moments where there's healthy evaluation and sort of the church taking stock of things. And I think that's part of the reason that I felt like it was worthwhile. I mean, my journey, there's a lot of it that I just needed to do for myself. Honestly, I needed to process my life, and I felt like the scope of reach of my books required me to try to in a more high profile way draw attention to the problems with that and be honest about that and own up to that. But the kind of unique circumstances that led to this, they don't seem to happen that often, and I think they're built in almost like institutional mechanisms that keep the church from, in a healthy way saying, well, let's look back at what we did here and let's evaluate, what that actually led to, what was the result of that, and how does that then need to reshape our thinking? And I just think there's a lot of self-preservation at work. It's complicated to sift through those things. It's controversial. And so, unfortunately, I think we often wait until there's like some huge crisis or problem. And or I would say that the voices that are trying to draw attention to the problems have been really hurt and even, traumatized and damaged, and they're now, outside of the fold, if you will. They're critics, and so, the people inside the church won't accept them as conversation partners because, well, you're angry, or you're no longer a person of faith. And so,
For sure, you read Rob Bell's books, and so now we can't even talk about you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got Rob Bell on your shelf, and you. So I just, that's something that I've observed in this whole process, that people end up kind of locking into their tribe and their tribal protectionary mindset, and they're not really willing to be honest about problems with that. And, I understand, because it's easy just to say, well, we didn't mean to do that, so, we shouldn't be blamed, or people shouldn't be angry. But I think it's something that needs to happen, or we will just keep repeating those same mistakes and those same problems. I don't know how to facilitate that.
Yeah, that's very true. I think anybody who's studied church history has got to look at that and say, okay, yeah, obviously we have this cycle of these problems where we emphasize something and then we miss the mark. But I think it's probably perhaps built into human nature. I mean, to me, even the scriptural, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, the scriptural journey to me is often one of, hey, this is what God is like. And then a few generations later, the picture is a little bit different and maybe a little bit more clarified. And maybe we focused on this thing in the past. I mean, Jesus himself keeps saying, look, you've heard it said, but let me tell you right now. So there's, I think, a constant revisioning and a clarifying that God invites us to. Mm-hmm. But like you said, as a church, are we particularly good or comfortable with that? I don't think so. But that would be a fascinating, kind of phenomenon to say, okay, can we look back? Can each of our tribes be encouraged to look back? Okay, what's gone on in evangelicalism? I mean, I'm within the charismatic world, so what's gone on? Okay, maybe we've been too focused on the end times. Okay, maybe we've been too focused on the significance of Israel, things that we should be thinking about, but maybe not at the expense of a Christocentric missional gospel. Which to me is I think what you're trying to pull out is why we need to listen to other voices. Why we need to say, okay, these people over here are okay. Can we listen to them and learn from them?
Well, I think that's very, very true. That willingness to step outside of your kind of circles, if you will, different streams. I mean, I'm mixing my metaphors here, but I do think that we also need to look at just the role of money and power and, issues of control when we get into this evaluation, because I just think the church is often co-opted. I mean, I'm from the States, so this is maybe more in the United States, but even the issues of purity culture, there are definite connections between that and specific political agendas related to, policies about AIDS, policies about abortion, ways in which political parties want to create, constituencies and blocks of votes and those types of things that then influence the way the church is talking about certain things. And then I think you get into the issues of money when you get into, the books that are written and the conferences that are conducted, and even churches and the finances that flow through churches, and how those things, without people even realizing it, are shaping massive movements within the church. And if we're not willing to kind of follow the money in that way, I don't know that we're going to be completely honest about the the influences and the motivations, and then the unhealthiness. Because I guarantee you that, there'll be something else that will be driving, the bestsellers list in Christian books and Christian publishing. Evangelicalism just loves fads. We're very fad based, and we assume that that's a move of the Spirit, and I think there's always a little bit of the Spirit, hopefully.
Yeah.
But I think you then, kind of the excesses and the kind of focus of it is often driven by mammon, I guess.
Oh, for sure. That's a great way to sum it up. I mean, if we look back, I was in publishing, so I can completely identify with that reality. I also ran a Christian bookstore, so I
yeah.
But it's like, I mean, in the last 10 years, I think probably the biggest standout would be what many people have begun to refer to as heaven tourism. And so it's like, okay, we've got all these near-death experiences, people who visited heaven or hell and have come back to tell the story. And so we have these semi-biblical accounts of people who have experienced life beyond and have come back to tell the story. And it's dressed up in language that's very like, it's kind of chick tract-ish, right? It's like, you guys need to get with God now because heaven is so wonderful and hell is so terrible. And but like you said, there's a lot of mammon behind this. There's a lot of, I mean, it's money, it's hegemony, it's control, it's telling people how to think. And is that maybe partly because we have a larger narrative that's actually quite escapist, because we are in pain and the world is falling apart, and we're either feeling guilty about our role in that, or we are terrified about what to do, or that it's going to happen to us, and we're just living in fear. So escapism sounds good. Control sounds good. Restricting the pain sounds good. And we're actually not really equipped still to do the hard work of taking up our cross each day and living in real, vulnerable, painful community.
Right.
So let's just read a book, and this is the new bestseller. Joshua Harris, victim of the hegemonic powers.
Well, I when I look at my own life, part of what I have to grapple with is my, I've been complicit in these things. I wrote these books that sold, and it was a big part of supporting my family, and I think I hate to admit this, but probably it took me longer to grapple with the problems, because it was just unthinkable to shoot the thing that was such a big part of my identity, such a big part of my livelihood. That was definitely a difficult part of the process for me. And I think I also had to recognize that, I wanted all these things. People can be very, they can try to give me an out by saying, oh, well, he was only 21 and those types of things. But, I wanted the glory of it. I wanted to be a best-selling author. I wanted to reach all these people. And unfortunately I went out with a message that had some real flaws, and I'm grateful that it helped some people, but it also hurt people. And that's something I really regret.
And our culture, held you up as an example of what it means to be godly and successful, right? And we have to acknowledge all those things. I'm really encouraged and blessed to hear that level of introspection from you. What is this journey then? Kind of, let's say at a macro level, your book got picked up, your multiple books, you're pastoring a church down in the States. Now you live in Canada. You mentioned your studies. What's the journey for Joshua Harris over these years? You've obviously raised your family as well, and tell us a bit about the silent years.
Yeah, well, I moved to Vancouver, BC 3.5 years ago to attend Regent College, a graduate school of theology, and that was at a point where I was just really burnt out in ministry, weary from a lot of church politics and, failure on my own part. Our church dealt with a huge sex abuse scandal. And through that process, I realized that I'd participated in failing really to encourage someone, to report. And we tried to handle it internally in a way that was just a huge mistake. So I was dealing with the regret of having mishandled that situation. And at a point where I just felt like, you know what, everything I've learned about leadership in the church and even so much of my Christian faith has been in one place and in one stream of the body of Christ. And I'm tired and I don't feel like I can keep doing this. And so decided to go to graduate school as a way to learn and hear other voices and just try to figure out where I was supposed to be in my life. And that's been a really difficult road for me, but also I think a healthy one for me to which ended up including this reevaluation of the book that I'm best known for, which was a big kind of symbol of me kind of grappling with my own story and my own journey. But I made the decision not to go back into pastoral ministry, which was a really hard one for me because I was dealing with other people's expectations and my own sense of, what it meant to be called by God. And am I somehow turning my back on my calling? But I'm really grateful that I went through that process. And now I'm just running my own business here in Vancouver. I've got an 18, a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I'm really appreciative that I'm living in Canada and kind of on a new chapter.
That's so wonderful. Obviously, I have a vested interest, I bias towards Canada, so hooray. Good job. Good job for coming to the light, my friend.
Well, thanks for letting us in. I'm grateful.
What does your spirituality look like today? To some people, like stating goodbye could be a metaphor for, fundamentalist black and white kind of secular, sacred, God says this and doesn't say this. What does your spiritual practice look like today?
Yeah, I'm really at a place of, I think, wrestling and dealing with doubt in a way that I've never let myself do before. And I'm really trying to be honest about that and not feel the need to too quickly define or to jump into a different tribe or to become a spokesman for any particular perspective. And so I would say that I'm a little confused, but hopeful, I think is the way I would put it.
I love that. That's good. That's a good answer, man. I think hopeful confusion and doubt have probably produced the best spiritual fruit in my life.
That's encouraging. Who are you? Who do you learn from? And are there authors or people that have been helpful to you?
Yeah, so I grew up my parents were missionaries in YWAM, and I kind of was a somewhat Baptist, somewhat Presbyterian, ended up in the charismatic church, and so then left the church. My wife and I moved abroad, and I took the opportunity to say, see ya, and we spent 10 years outside the institutional church.
Really?
And yeah, and it felt really terrible and rebellious, and then it felt really good. And somewhere along the line, I discovered that I still loved the Lord. And I desperately wanted to know God and to feel like God knew me. But I felt like so much of what I'd been given was machinery and was baggage that was actually holding me back from doing real spiritual life with God and doing real spiritual life from other believers. People would say, oh, you're not going to church. Are you forsaking the fellowship of believers? And I would say, you know what, man? Like, I've been in that building for so long, and I've seen very little fellowship. I've seen plenty of people actively forsaking the fellowship every Sunday morning. And so we started reading folks who were talking about house church and organic Christianity, and that was a good a good journey for us for a time. We discovered, I think, the real beauty of one anothering and of learning to bear with a small but vibrant community of people who were committed to one another, to just doing life in all of its messy, ugly ways. And then kind of at the high point of that, we moved back to Toronto, which was a surprise. We didn't see it coming. And I started reading more on church history and broadening my understanding of what it means to be a Christian, and I think broadening my horizons of orthodoxy, of saying, okay, there's people who have held to Orthodox Christianity for centuries, and they don't believe the same things about the Bible that I believe, or they don't believe the same things about the end times that I believe, or they don't believe any number of things that I believe. And am I confident enough to undermine the veracity and vibrancy of their faith? No, I no longer am. So I've begun reading Henry Nouwen and getting into some Catholic stuff. I've been reading N.T. Wright. I've been reading Greg Boyd, Anabaptist stuff. At the same time, I still very much live within this charismatic world, and my wife and I are children's pastors at a very charismatic church. And that was a surprise. We turned up one Sunday because our good friends were there, and I just felt the whisper of the Lord inside me say, "Here's home.
Wow.
Learn to love these people." And I was like, "Okay, here we are." I mean, I said to Brian Zahn in discussion with him recently, look, if it was up to me, I'd just like to be an Anabaptist and be super nonviolent and peaceful and just like and just kind of like even be a Mennonite and follow a simple life. But it's not up to me, right? Like I've surrendered my life to the Lord, and so I have to trust that He's guiding me. So I've been reading kind of really broadly, finding just different authors. I've been, even back into the evangelical world. I just read Lisa TerKeurst's latest book, It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, about her journey through her marriage, falling apart and gradually pursuing restoration and breast cancer. And this is someone within that world that could be labeled as a little black and white, who's having to wrestle with real suffering and pain. And some of the things she said in that book were some of the best things I've ever read on this topic of suffering. And I've read St. John of the Cross. I've read Dark Night of the Soul. So I really resonated when you were saying about reading and listening and learning to others, because that's totally been the fruit. I love that you interviewed Deb Hirsch, because Alan Hirsch and those guys, they're fascinating to me. Their pursuit of missional, kind of integrated spirituality, I think is beautiful and is one of the ways forward for the evangelical church.
Oh, that's so good. I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Cool. I really have enjoyed this this discussion. I know I've probably said a lot more than I normally do in an interview, but I think somehow, Joshua, I'm hearing from you a humility and an unwillingness to be the white male with the important opinion. And I think that's good. I think that's important. I think us white males have to interface with that, right? What is our role in this culture? Where do we sit quietly and listen?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that would disagree with that perspective and would prefer that I not have made this documentary and just sit down and shut up. So there's definitely a mixed opinion about that. But I do want to really be in a season of listening and learning, and this documentary is really just my attempt to say, this is what I've seen about what I've gotten wrong, and here's a conversation that I think other people need to have, and hear other voices. And I'd like to just fade into anonymity and step out of this spotlight as quickly as possible.
You see, okay, then let me hold, since I've still got you, I'm going to force this issue, because it is I feel like we can't have it both ways as a culture. What everybody's going to say is Joshua Harris should apologize for these awful things that he's said and done. And so Joshua Harris makes a documentary and releases a statement, and now we all say, look at him exercising his white male privilege and releasing this documentary and getting back up on his soapbox, and it's just all about him. And I've seen those tweets, and I think we've got to do better than that. Like, as a whole culture, like, we can demand that Joshua Harris disappear from the spotlight, but we'll also be here saying he should never publish those books in the first place. So he comes out and releases a statement, and we can't be happy with it. And I reject that silliness. I think that we've got to have room for this kind of dialogue, and for people like you to come out and, public crime or whatever, public apology. And I think, to me personally, hearing the way you talk about this, I think you're completely sincere. So I'm glad for my part that you've gone on this journey, that you've shared with all of us. And I'm glad that you're saying at the same time, okay, let's just quietly disappear and take care of my family, and like, this is life. Let's get back to the realness of like hands in the dirt, loving people. Social media is so weird.
Well, there are a lot of voices, and it's important for people to be able to voice their thoughts and perspectives. I've been given that opportunity, so I can't begrudge other people having that opportunity.
Joshua, where can people find out about the documentary and the statement that you issued?
It's all available, or can be linked to on my personal site, which is joshharris.com. And they can find a link to the film, which they can watch for free. And the statement is also on there as well. So
thanks for making the time for us and for sharing this journey, Joshua. Appreciate it.
Great talking with you, Jonathan. Thank you.
You've been listening to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. Thank you for tuning in. The podcast is a weekly show featuring interviews, lots of interviews, with people I find to talk to. What do we talk about? Life, God, things that matter. I'm a children's pastor, a writer, and a business consultant, but my passion is to help people live in a higher level of freedom and to love others at a higher standard of love. So who have I had on the show? I've had famous Bible teachers, leaders of megachurch ministries, local worship leaders, Olympians, DJs, evangelists, community workers, authors, all kinds of folks. Moms and dads, people like you. Head over to jonathanpuddle.com/podcast or podcast, and you'll see all of the past episodes. You can also read my blog, jump on the mailing list. Find me on social media at Jonathan Puddle. See you next week.